These days are
Hello everyone, my name is DB Graphics, and today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to make a full 2D intro. Now, I wouldn't normally do this, but it's a special occasion. I hit 2,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is absolutely insane. I'd like to thank you, every single one of you, for subscribing to my channel. I really appreciate it, and I never thought I'd get this far. But let's get into the tutorial. We're going to be using Adobe After Effects CC 2014. Different versions are okay, but this just happens to be the one I'm using. So before I start, I'd like to point out a few things. My layout of After Effects is 100% going to be different than yours unless you've decided to copy mine, and that's totally fine. I have a few scripts on the side that you might not have, and a few things that aren't usually docked by default. So if these scripts or if these panels that are in their positions become important, I'll be sure to point that out. So the first step of actually making the intro is having an idea of the kind of thing that you want to make. Now, for example, I'm going to be recreating this intro right here. Let's watch it. Now, I think the animation at the beginning is really simple and really clean, and the text is not that hard to create either. So I'm going to be going through every single thing in here, and the next step is, after finding the kind and type and style of intro you'd like to make, you have to pick out a song, and I've decided to pick out this song. Let's give it a listen. Now, once you've found a song online, or a song that you've already downloaded, if you already have it downloaded, then don't worry about it. But if you found one online and you want to download it, in case you didn't know, there's a nifty little site called clipconverter.cc. There's a few other ones that work well with YouTube, but this is my one that I like the most. So all you have to do is slip it in, choose your format, and hit start, and it should convert, and you can download it straight to your folder. I'm actually going to open my music folder on my other screen and drag it in. Okay, now we're all set to create this intro. So once you dragged your song into After Effects, we're going to want to create a composition. Now, you're welcome to copy my settings. You can use whatever settings you want. These are just ones that I would recommend. Width 1920 by 1080. If you upload in 720 and you plan to use the intro in 720, then I would advise using 1280 by 720. But for this case, I'm going to be using 1080p. You want to keep this at square pixels. I recommend 60 FPS, but if of course, you're welcome to set this to 25, 29.94, 30, or you could just do 60 like me. And this intro is going to be about 9 seconds. You're welcome to make this longer if you want. And the resolution, I'd keep it half until you go to render it, and background color is not important. So let's create this composition. You're going to see something on your After Effects that looks similar to this. So it's gonna be pretty blank, nothing going on, obviously, because we have yet to create anything. So let's watch this real close. So the first thing that happens is a solid pops up from the bottom, and then we have a little square that comes out of the middle. So let's start with the solid. So when you're selected down here, you can see if you're selected on a panel, it's got this yellow outline. Go ahead and do Control Y or Command Y if you're on a Mac on your keyboard. And it should bring up this little interface here to create a solid settings. You can name this, you can change the size, keep the size at the size of the composition, and in case you change it, you can hit this and it'll make it the size of your composition. Now, color is optional. I'm going to make this a kind of a very light gray. Now, what you want to do is you want to select this layer and hit P on your keyboard, skip into about a second, and hit this little stopwatch here. Now, if you don't know how keyframing in After Effects works, I'm going to leave a video in the description that explains it really well. So watch that before you get started if you don't know what you're doing. So basically what we're going to do is at 1 second, this is the position of the solid. Now at the beginning, we want this to be below our composition, so you can move it down while holding shift to make it straight. And you can see the animation right now is pretty boring. So what we're going to do is select these keyframes and hit F9 on your keyboard. That's going to ease them. Now each of these little dots on this line here, that indicates where the solid will be at that frame. You can see there's more dots towards the end. That means that it starts a little bit slower, goes quicker towards the end, and slows down a bit at the end. Now we can use that to our advantage to make this animation really smooth. So what we want to do is select the last keyframe and hit this button called the graph editor. Now if you're not familiar with this, then I'm going to leave another video in the description by my friend Joe or Geeky Brackets. He did a very good explanation on how this works. And if your graph looks like this when you open it up, then you want to hit this button that says choose graph type and options. You want to hit that and go to speed graph. Now you want to select this next keyframe here and drag this little handle to the left. And you can see this graph shows the speed of the transition. So it's going to start out a bit slow, then go really fast, and then end very slow. So if we watch this over, it looks nice and smooth. We're going to be doing the same process for just about every animation in this entire intro. So make sure you have this skill locked down. You have to know how to do this. And to speed up the process, what I'm going to do is next time we do something, I'm going to hit F9 and reset this. Next time we do something like this, I'm not going to go in the graph editor and change it. This is what this script up here is for. Now, basically, whenever I drag this up here, it does the same thing as going in here. So keep that in mind when I use this up here. It's doing what we just went over. It just makes it a bit faster on me, and it makes this tutorial a bit shorter, so it's not like 2 hours long. So we have the solid, now we need the little square that pops up. So I'm going to say about 30 frames in. Sorry, I got to check if I did this. Okay, yes I did. Actually, I want to say about 20 frames in, we are going to create a rectangle. So there's a little rectangle tool up here. You can hit Q, or you can select it up here by clicking and holding and selecting the shape you want. You could also do a circle, you could do a polygon, or a star, whatever you want. But I'm going to use a rectangle, and I'm going to make this white. Now, what I find easy is instead of making the shape, dragging it around and, changing the anchor point and such, so it's centered, and then you have to go in here and change the size, blah, blah, blah. I think it's easier just to select the tool and double click, and it makes a rectangle the size of your composition. Now you can go in here and set the size to whatever you want. I'm going to make it 0. Because we want it to start out small, and it's going to get bigger. Let's see, does this cover the entire screen? No, it does not. It is kind of a hollow square that comes up and fills the screen. So what we're going to want to do is start at about 20 frames in. If you're on 30 FPS, this is going to be 10 frames in for you. Whenever I say a frame value, if you're on 30 FPS, divide that by 2, and it should be accurate for you. So the size, we want to start at 20 frames and go into about a second and a half. And then make this size 2202. That's kind of our magic number here. And then you want to go into your transform panel and change the rotation to 45 degrees. So now what we have is a square increasing in size until it covers the whole screen. Once again, I'm going to hit F9 and I'm going to select this one. If you don't have the script up here, you would go in here and change the graph, but I'm just going to change that, and it does the whole smoothing for me, which I think is very convenient. That's why I'm using it. So what we can do is we can optimize the intro. Since this square doesn't show up until 20 frames in, we can crop the layer so it only has to render this one layer instead of rendering both layers when you go to render it. It doesn't make a huge difference, but if your computer isn't particularly beefy, then you might want to render with as least stuff on screen as possible so it goes nice and quick. So what we're going to do next is something that a lot of people don't understand. Now it's called track mats. So basically what a track mat does is I'm going to duplicate this layer and offset it a little bit. Don't worry, I'm going fast because I'm not explaining this, but right here, if we select this layer, and you can see we have a track mat panel. If you don't, hit F4 on your keyboard and it'll bring up these extra menus. If we do alpha mat, then what it's going to do is this layer is only going to be shown when this layer is active. So you can see this layer is large, but we can't see it because this layer is tiny. And if we invert that, which is what we're going to do, alpha mat inverted, you can see when this shape comes in, it starts to cut away at the inside shape. I hope I've made that pretty clear how this works, and that's basically what we're going to do. I went really quick through that, so I'm going to go through it again. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our little rectangle here, and we're going to do Control D on the keyboard or Command D on Mac. Or you could copy and paste the layer with Command or Control V or C and V if you prefer that. I do Control D because it's a bit easier. Now you want to go in 10 frames. And the easiest way for me to do that is to hold Shift and hit the next frame button. If your default After Effects layout, that should be around here-ish, but I have it moved down here. Shift and click, it should bring you in 10 frames, and you can select these and hold Shift for it to snap, and it'll bring it ahead 10 frames. Once again, we're going to optimize the layer by bringing it in a bit. You can see if we actually hide this, that was a mistake from last time. You can see it starts to cut away at that layer. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually, I think 10 frames is a bit much. Let's go back by 5. We're going to move this in. Go ahead by 5 and move that in. So you can see the less you offset the frames, the less it's going to, or the more it's going to cut away. So this is a little bit thinner now. It's more of a personal preference thing. I think it was a bit too thick before, but now it looks just fine. So what we're going to do is you can see on the actual intro itself, there's 2 of these. And one of them is blue. So we're going to duplicate this effect here with Control C, Control V. If you do Control D, never mind, that actually works. I thought it worked differently. It usually does, but now it's not doing it. But what we can do is we can go ahead 10 frames and we can move this in, and once again we can also optimize these layers by cutting them when they're not visible anymore. So to cut a layer, you do Command or Control Shift and D at the same time. Make sure you're at where you want to cut it, and then you can hit delete on your keyboard. So do that for all these layers at the last keyframe, and we're going to change the color of this. I'm going to change it to a nice turquoise color. Now if we watch this back, we get this nice effect right here. So you can see we just duplicated this and offset it a little bit so it happens a little bit later. And change the colors so you can see the difference between them. And that's our first transition there. Now let's go back a little bit and watch what's next. Okay, so a square popped up and it rotated a little bit. So what we can do is we can do a similar process to what we did the first time for this element out here. We can create a square by double clicking the tool and opening the menu, and I'm going to hit 0 to equal out the aspect ratio, hit tab, and then we're going to do 500. Yeah, that looks about right. So what we want to do next is go to about here, frame 35, and hit the keyframe button, drag this one a bit forward, and change the size to be 0. So once again, we get kind of a scale up shape. And once again, we're going to hit F9 on these keyframes, and you go into your graph editor and smooth it out. So once again, we're going to optimize the layer by shrinking it in. And we can actually hide all those keyframes except for this one. So you can see we get our square coming up like that. And you can see it starts to rotate as we go along. I'm actually going to turn down the speed so we can see it a bit better. So the square comes in and rotates. So we want to hit Shift and R on our keyboard. And you can see now we have the size and rotation brought up on our screen. So go to about frame 55, hit your rotation keyframe button, We're actually going to set this to 45 to begin with. So it starts out at this rotation, and then at about 135, we'll make this 180 degrees. Once again, we're going to want to change the graph editor by, dragging the handle in. Once again, I'm using this up here to make it a bit quicker. So you can see, you get a pretty smooth transition. And you can actually go in and smooth this out yourself, which is what I'm going to do. And we can actually drag these handles in a bit and change when the actual fast part of the rotation happens, like that. Now if you want to see what I just did there, I moved this first keyframe back and kind of messed with the graph a little bit. The graph is something you really have to experiment with to make it look nice, in your opinion. I think this looks okay, so we'll move on. Now you can see here, did I just open Cinema 4D? Dang it. See, we have these little line elements, the circles, that kind of accent the rotation, and we're going to add that next. So we're going to go to the circle by clicking and holding and dragging down to the circle. We're going to make sure our fill is set to this red line. If it's not, then click the word fill and hit this icon right here and click OK. So we're going to create a fill. I'm going to use this color right here, and the stroke we can set to 30. Now once again, to double click the tool and it should bring it up. And we can go in down in here, hit 0, and then 750. All right, now we can go to add this little arrow right here. That's also up here if you want to use that one instead. And then hit trim paths. Now you want to open that up. You want to move to the frame where this rotation on this square layer starts. And we're actually going to drag the end down to 0 and hit the stopwatch. And then remember, hold shift and hit the next frame button to move in by 10, and then hit the start keyframe. Now, if you've ever worked in Cinema 4D, which I accidentally opened, we will close that, and if you've used sweep NURBS, this works exactly the same. The start and the end are just like the start and end of a sweep NURBS. So if you're unfamiliar with that, just keep following this tutorial. So I want to go to a second and 30 frames in and change both of these increments to 50. Now you can see what that has done is it created this line element like so. You're welcome to play around with where these keyframes are positioned to make it look better in your opinion. And once again, I'm going to use the graph editor to smoothen out that little animation there. As you can see, that looks very nice in my opinion. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this animation once and hit U to open up all the keyframes. And we're going to move in by 5 frames and drag these keyframes forward, holding shift to snap it to your playhead here. Once again, we're going to optimize the layer by trimming and cutting so it doesn't have to render it when it's not visible. Did I move this too far? No, it's fine. Okay. Sorry, I thought I made a mistake, but we're good. Okay, so this one, I'm actually going to open up the size. We're going to make this one 800. Oops. 800. And we're going to make the stroke 50. And we're going to make it white. There we go. Now one thing that you can add, it's optional if you'd like to add this. This circle, I'm going to right click in the effect controls and go to transition and go to Venetian blinds. Now this is how you add stripes. You want to set this to 45. The width, actually I'm going to do this to -45. The width you can set to 75 to 100-ish. I think 75 is probably going to be fine. And change the completion to 50. See, now we got our little stripes here. I'm actually going to change this down to 25. So you can see what it does is it cuts away in a blinds fashion. Now, the less you have it, the less cutting there is. The more you have it, the more cutting there is. Like that. But I'm going to put this to 25. So if we watch this transition over, you can see the line has kind of stripes on it. I think that looks pretty cool. So what we can do is we can select both of these by holding Shift and copy and paste them, and hit R on your keyboard and change this second value here to 180. You can see now we have a full circle. Now usually I would set the trim paths to 100%, but since this is only half, then we set it to 50. See, that looks pretty nice. I'm actually going to move the white layer below the blue layer, so the blue one is on top. So that looks pretty nice. Now what we can do next, if we watch this over, you can see we have these line transitions. We're going to create those next. So the pen tool is a very powerful tool, and using it, we can create some pretty cool stuff. So I'm going to make this color, that color right there. There we go, looks good. I'm going to set this to be 65, the stroke width. And what we can do is we can use the pen tool. If you've ever used Illustrator, this should be pretty familiar to you. I believe Photoshop has something similar to this as well. But if you've never used the pen tool before, then I'm going to walk you right through it. So around the top left-ish, we want to click and drag down. You can see we have these little handles, and these handles will indicate the curve. So now we kind of want to go towards the middle-ish. Hold on, let me refer back to this. Aha, okay. So now we want to go down here and use the handles once again. You can see the curve is indicated by these handles. You can see the farther out you pull it, the tighter the curve is. You can change the rotation, stuff like that. Just make it look the way you want it to look. If it doesn't look good, then if you hit the layer with the pen tool selected, you can select one of these points and kind of change the path. And this color is so similar to this line that's kind of hard to see. I apologize for that. But I think the line looks all right. So what we can do once again is add trim paths. I'm going to troll that down and do something similar to what we did before. I'm going to do this at 1 second. So I'm going to do start the end and then go 10 frames in and hit start. And then I'll go 30 frames in. Actually do 40 frames in. I hit shift and hit this twice, or sorry, 4 times to do 40 frames, 4 times 10. And then I'm going to drag these up to 100 and offset that a little bit. You're welcome to copy exactly what I've done here, but you're welcome to play around with this as well. So we can select this and go down and hit F9 once again and do our easing. I'm just going to use this like I have been the whole time and optimize the layer by cutting and trimming. So now if we watch this over, you can see we have a nice line like so. You can see in some of my intros, I do this over and over and over to give lots and lots of detail. The more of these you add, the more detail you bring in. And sometimes more detail is worse, but in this case, I think it's just right. So if we select the layer, you can see the anchor point is most likely already going to be in the middle of the composition, as you can see. So what we can do is copy this 1, 2, 3 more times and hit this and hit S to bring up the scale. And we want to unlink all the aspect ratios here. So this one will be left at 100, 100. This one we're going to set to be negative 100, 100. And you can see what that does here. The first increment is horizontal and the second increment is vertical. So if we set this to negative 100, it's going to, in theory, reflect across to this side. Now we can do that again for the other increment to make it negative 100. You can see that takes this one and reflects it over downwards. Now if we do this for both, you can see we're going to fill in the last corner. And you can see our nice little transition like that. See, pretty cool, huh? You can do this as many times as you want, make it look as good as you want, but I'm going to leave it as so. So what is next? Okay, so we have some squares, rotated squares, scaling up. That seems easy enough. Hold on, what is next? Okay, so it's just these squares and some line elements and a transition. So that should be pretty self-explanatory. What we want to do, we've done this before. Select your rectangle tool, change the stroke, like before, hit the word stroke and hit the red line to turn off the stroke, and then the fill we can set to be like a dark purple. I'm actually going to do it like a dark blue. There we go. That's a nice color. Double click, go into the settings, hit 0. I'm actually going to go back a little bit, 115 maybe. Size, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a whole second ahead, and change this number once again, 2202, 2202. It doesn't work. This number is specifically tailored to fill the screen with a circle, but it also works with this. It's just, you're welcome to change it so it's exact, but this is pretty dang close. So if we go to transform, change the rotation to 45, you can see with a circle, this edge would come right here, but this one's just a little bit more. You can make it smaller if you'd like, but I don't think it's that important. So what we can do is select these, F9, do the easing, and we can trim the layer down. We don't want to trim down this side because we want this over here. Now I'm actually going to edit the graph a bit so it's not as abrupt of a change. Like that. Looks good. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually, since this is going to cover up all of this, right about here, you can see it's no longer covering anything. That means I can trim these away because we can no longer see them. That's a big part of optimizing. So once there's another transition that covers everything up, then everything below it is no longer visible and you can cut it away. See, now that's only rendering one solid here. So that's a nice way to optimize your intros. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy this once more and offset the keyframes by 10 frames. Drag these, drag them forward, and we're going to cut this one a bit. So then we want to change the color so it's visible, because right now if they're the same color then you can't really see them apart. I'm going to make this one a bit darker. You can see got two different shapes. I'm going to once again add Venetian blinds to this, and I'm going to do some custom settings, 90 degrees, 100 width, and 50% to get us some stripes. I'm actually going to set this to 150 and 40. There we go. I think it looks good. And once you can see now we've added the Venetian blinds, now we have to wait for this transition to end for this back or for this layer to go away. So we're going to drag that forward so it doesn't go away too early. All right, so that's fine. And now that this layer is underneath this one and it's no longer seen, we can also trim this one. So now it's only just rendering the one right here. So the next transition we're going to do is pretty tedious, and you're going to have to bear with me on this one. Let's do the lines first so we can go a bit easy, and then we'll get into the hard stuff. So this transition here is just a line. We're going to turn off the fill. I've explained how to do this. And we're going to make this a white layer, and we're going to change this to 40 pixels. So what we can do is you can hit the quotation mark button on your keyboard to bring up the title action safe. This indicates, corners, edges, and the center is the most important part of this. Now, you can also hit this little button right here and turn on the title action safe, but the keyboard shortcut is the quotation mark button. So what we can do is zoom in real close, make sure we hit the middle, make a point at the middle, and then come out and hold Shift and hit your next point. That will make it exactly 45 degrees. Now if you hit V on your keyboard and select this first point and hold shift and use the arrow keys, go left, up, left, up. We don't want this directly in the middle because it would look really weird, trust me. If you want to do it yourself to see what it looks like, it doesn't look particularly good. Now I'm actually going to make this line a bit longer, like that. And you can see we're going to just do trim paths with this one again, add trim paths. I've already done this a few times, so I'm not going to go too in depth onto this. I'm going to start at 1 second and 45 frames. So I'm just going to do my normal settings, what we've been doing this whole time. Okay, once again, we can optimize this by cutting the layer in and trimming the end. You can also turn off the title action say if you don't need it anymore. We just needed it to position it correctly. So you can see we got our line right here. And what we can do is, instead of duplicating it 4 times to make this line transition, we can actually use a nifty little thing called a repeater. Now if you use Cinema 4D, then this is similar to a cloner, where it clones the object. You can change the transition or the transformation, so you can clone it in different ways. Now here we're going to go add and repeater. You can see it creates it 3 times. That's just the default setting. So we're going to go to copies and set this from 3 to 4. Go to transform, and the position is what makes it go farther away. We're going to set this to 0. You can see it's just 1 because it's 4 stacked right here. Now the rotation we're going to set to be 90 degrees. You can see what that does is it creates this little burst, which looks very nice. One second, I'm going to edit this, make it look a bit nicer in my opinion. So you can see that looks pretty nice, I think. I'm actually going to bring that in a little bit by like 5 frames. There we go. Okay. So this next part is going to be a bit challenging, so please try and bear with me. What we're going to do is create a new composition for this whole transition because it requires quite a few layers that will clutter up this entire timeline. So making a new composition will basically get rid of all the clutter that would have been here if we created in this composition. So same settings as before, hit OK. Now what we have to do now is we can actually use a solid for this instead of shape layers. So select down here, remember the orange outline you can see, hit Control Y and it'll bring up the solid options. Now I'm going to make this layer white, FFFFFFF, and hit OK, and hit S on the solid to bring up the scale, and unclick this constrained proportions. Now what we're going to do is create a cool little transition by changing the scale. So we're this first property, we're going to take 100 and divide it by however many bars you want. I'm going to do 7, so 100 divided by 7 is 14.3%. So I'm actually going to change this to 14.5. I would recommend rounding up your little number here so it doesn't become an issue later, because trust me, if you don't, it's going to be a bit weird and you might have to add some more solids. So what we can do now is copy this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, so we have a total of 7 layers. Now this first one, to make this easy, I'm going to make the middle one stay in the middle, and the one below and above that will be to the sides. So this one we're going to use the arrow keys to be precise and line it up as best as you can. Set this to full, the quality is set to full, so you can easily see if there's going to be a gap in the final render. Now we're going to move this over and over and over so it's nice and straight. You can see now if we go in order from top to bottom, this one is going to be on the far side, this one's going to be right here, this one will be right here, this one's in the middle, and it keeps going side to side. So this one we can actually use the align panel, and if you don't have this docked by default, go to window and hit the align button. That'll bring it up somewhere. This is where I have it docked. It'll probably be over here somewhere. So you want to hit this one right here, horizontal left alignment, and that'll bring it all the way to the right. or to the left. Now this one we can do the opposite, bring it to the right by using this one. Now these last ones we have to move manually, but it's pretty easy. It should fit right in that little gap, and it should fill the entire composition. Now if you've missed any of these steps and it doesn't look like this, then go back and watch this part again. I understand this is confusing, and that's why I've tried to explain this as best as I can. If I haven't explained it very well, I don't know what to tell you because I'm trying my best here. So this middle one, we're going to want to hit S and hit the scale keyframe. We're going to want to bring this in a bit and change the second value to 0. So it's going to scale vertically, like so. Once again, F9. I'm going to change, I'm going to change the graph editor so it looks like that, as always. And now it will scale up like that. And we can actually copy these keyframes to make our lives easier. So you want to start from the beginning, and this is just a workflow thing. You can go and change the frame individually yourself. But to go quick, hold Shift and next frame and select layers 2 and 6 and do Control V or Command V on a Mac. And go ahead 5 frames, select layer 1 and layer 7 and hit Control V or Command V on a Mac. And hold Shift and go back 10 frames, select layer 3 and layer 5 and Control V. Now what we've what we've essentially done is we have offset each of these keyframes by 5. If we watch this, this is what we've created. If yours looks nothing like this, then go back and watch this part again. Now what we can do is go back to our main composition, which should be here. If it's not like this, then you can double click it up here and open it up. And what we can do is we can import this composition straight into this one. Now you can see this doesn't look particularly great. For some reason this isn't showing properly, so we can change layer 3, push it to the left or to the right a little bit, and layer 5 to the left, and that should fix our problem. There we go. If it's got to be solid here. You can't have any lines because that'll look really strange. Now, wherever this line transition starts, that's where you want to start this composition. And maybe a little bit forward. About 5 to 10 frames is usually pretty safe. There you go, that looks fine. Okay. Now let's refer back to this intro. You can see that transition actually happens twice, and luckily, since this is an entire composition, we don't have to duplicate 7 layers and move them individually. We can copy the actual composition and add another iteration of the transition and move it forward. Now you can see these are the same color, and to change the color, say if I wanted to change this to like a red or something, you can see it changes both of these compositions, these layers, to be red, because these are the same thing. So you're probably thinking, man, how do we do that? There's just a nifty little effect. If we select the second one, right click and go to generate and fill, you can see it fills the whole thing with whatever color you want. I'm actually going to make this a nice light blue. So you can see we have this transition right here. I think it looks very nice. I'm actually going to move this in by another 5 frames. I think 5 isn't quite enough. 10 is probably fine. Yes. Okay. So the last thing we have to do is the text, and that is very self-explanatory. All we have to do is add some text. I'm going to add text. Whoa, mind-blowing. What we're going to do is we're going to select this. You can select a typeface that you want to use. I'm going to use Axis. Alternatively, I would use Campton or Nexa or Gotham. Those are ones that I like to use, just so you can try them out, see which ones you like, or you can pick one for yourself. This one only comes in a bold fashion. And the size, you're welcome to change yourself. I'm going to change this to 120. The spacing, I would usually crank that, but with this typeface, it doesn't look very good. I'm going to do -20 because I think that looks nice. And this color, if you want to copy this hex code right here, it's 2E2632. It's just a dark purple. I think looks really nice. You can make this whatever color you want, but I'm going to stick with this one. Now, chances are you didn't create this text right in the middle. So if you want to select the layer and center the anchor point, you can either use Motion V2, center anchor point script, or you can hit Y on your keyboard and hold Control, and it'll snap to the middle. Now to center this text layer, we can use these buttons on the Align tab, horizontal center alignment and vertical center alignment. That will center it. Now we get to choose a transition for our text. Whether we want it to use a position to scale or to move up from the bottom, or we can scale it up, or we can do some cool bounce effectors or whatever. I'm going to keep it simple and use a preset actually. Now in my animation presets, I have a text preset called Armor Type -2.0.3. I'm going to leave a download for this in the description, and basically what it does is it creates this nice text effect like that. I think that looks really nice. I'm actually going to set the offset to be 2 instead of 1 because I think that looks pretty nice. And there we go. That's our text right there. Now, I'm not going to go too complicated and go into how I did all this fancy text stuff and all the tracing and stuff, because I've done tutorials on this before, and I'll leave that in the description, as well as a card in the top right of your screen up here. So I'm just going to leave it at this, and that should be it. You know what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to change the blue layer to be on the bottom. So this one will be white. I think that looks a bit better. Okay, so the last thing we have to do is add a fade out. Now we can create a new solid on the top by doing Control Y and selecting a black solid and hitting OK. Since we didn't add a fade out in the beginning, or since we don't need one because it has a transition, then we can clip it to where the fade out is going to be. Now with the layer selected, you want to hit T. That'll bring up the opacity. We go to about 845 and hit your keyframe, and then go to the beginning and change this to 0. And you can see we have a nice little fade out here. And at the end of this layer, it actually does an end transition, which I'm going to offset a little bit. And what we can do is I'm just going to change that. I think with opacity, it's not necessary to change the graph editor. I'm just going to leave it as is. Now with this layer, I forgot that we can optimize. What does this layer do? Okay, so right about here, we can cut it. Boom, and it's gone. Okay, so that's about it for the intro. We can also add black bars. I'm not going to do that. And one thing that we can also add is a shadow to the text. Now, most people don't know how to do this. It's actually a very simple thing to do. Now, if you've used multiple layers for your text, like one for each letter to do some animation or whatever, there's a good chance that you're going to want to pre-compose it by right-clicking and going to pre-compose. And I'm going to do it anyways, even though it's only one layer. So we can change this to text and hit OK. Make sure this little one is selected if it's not already, and hit OK. And you can see this whole composition here. We can actually shrink this and bring this forward and right click and trim comp to work area. You can see that it only comes in until just about now. That's once again for optimization reasons. Excuse me. Now what we can do is we can duplicate this layer and select the bottom one and make this a 3D layer. If you don't see this panel right here, you can hit this one right here, or sorry, this one right here, And that should bring up this little panel. Oops. And then this little box right here indicates the 3D layer. Now what we can do is we can set this X rotation to -88.5. You're welcome to change this value to whatever you think looks good, but I think that looks fine. Now you want to hit P on your keyboard and change 540 to 800. You can see where this is going. This is our shadow layer. Now to make it look more like a shadow, we're going to add a Gaussian blur. I'm going to change this to 15. Now the last thing we can do, I think this is a bit strong, so we can change the opacity to 30. Actually, I'm going to go down a little bit more and go to 15. I think that looks good. So that's about it for this intro. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to turn on motion blur for everything by hitting this button right here and selecting all the layers and hitting this button right there. We can also go into these ones and turn on motion blur and this one. Now I'm going to add the song and change the position so it starts at the right time, and then I'm going to pre-render it and show you what we've made. So positioning the song is just a matter of finding where you want it to go, and you can use the period key on your numpad. If you don't have a number pad, then I don't know what the button is, I'm sorry. But that previews only the audio, and you can drag this layer in to make it right where you want it. So just keep dragging and previewing until it's at where you want it to be. Okay, I think that's fine. I'm going to pre-render this. I'm going to speed this up because it's most likely going to take a while. And to speed up the pre-render, you can also turn down the render quality. I'm going to leave it on half because that looks fine. And I'll be back when this is complete. Okay, the whole thing is done rendering, but the one thing I'm going to do before I actually show you the final product is to hit L on the audio layer. That's going to open up the audio levels where we can add a fade in and fade out. Now I'm going to add the fade in from 0 frames to 2 seconds and 15 frames. So I'm going to keyframe at 0 and then go to the beginning and change this to -40. And I'm going to go to 7.5 seconds and keyframe once again by hitting this button and then going to the end and doing -55. Now let's watch this over again. And of course it has to render this for some reason. I'll shut up so you can watch this. I'm pretty proud of the outcome here. I think that was a good, I think this is a very easy tutorial to follow, and I think the final product is really quite impressive, I think. And it only took us, what, 52 minutes is how long I've been recording. So, yeah, once again, I'd really like to thank you for 2,000 subscribers, and this project file. The reason I made this text instead of like 2000 or my name or whatever is because this project file I will put up for download on my website and in the description as a free template that you are completely free to use, no credit required. And this, once again, there's going to be lots of links in the description that will help you create this if you're pretty novice in After Effects. So once again, before I end off the video, I'd like to thank you very, very much for 2,000 subscribers. When I started, I had no clue I'd be this far, and I'm sure you've heard this speech about 1 billion times, so I'm not going to drag it on too long. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. If you found this very useful, then I'd like you to leave a like on the video. That would be fantastic. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and leave a comment below the video, and I'll try my best to help you out. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And that's about it for me. If you want to see my latest intro, click right about here. And if you want to see my latest tutorial, then click right about here. This has been Noah, and I am signing off. Goodbye.